we've dealt with the story of Yosef. We will probably come back to one more session, perhaps, from that story. But this is the coda. This is this shir is the coda to Bereshit in terms of how the Torah wants us to view it. Let's start by recognizing something that we've said before, and that is that Jewish history starts twice. Jewish history starts first with Avraham and the patriarchal and matriarchal era, and then starts again when we experience Yetzias Mitzrayim, at which point the nation is born. So we have the patriarchal and matriarchal era. The era of the Avos and Imahos is first, and then the nation is born. And the question, of course, that is raised by many commentaries, it's the first Rashi actually in the Torah, is why didn't the Torah begin with the birth of the nation? Can everyone hear me now? Great. Why didn't the Torah begin with the birth of the nation? In other words, with the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people as a people, which is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. Why does the Torah begin with all of these stories when the reality is meant to be a book of mitzvot, etc.? Why not start with mitzvot? So there are numerous answers, but I'd like to suggest three global contributions that are made to our story from the era of the Avos and Imos. And you have them on the page before you. First is individuality. The patriarchal, matriarchal era, the era of the Avos and Imahos, is the era of the Yochid. It's the era in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a people that their entire story is going to be defined by the individuals. Avram and Sarah. That's the whole story of Bnei Israel, right? In other words, Yitzchak and Rivka, the children, Yaakov. All of these people are individuals who teach us a great deal. But on a global level, what it teaches us is that individuality is important. And as we move into our nation building, it's very important never to forget the Yachid. There are two destroyed communities or societies, we've spoken about this before, that are destroyed early in the Torah. They are the Dor HaMabul, which we just read about, and the Dor HaFlaga, which we just read about, the generation of the flood and the generation of dispersion. I'm not going to go into it now but they each represent, I think, if you understand Chazal correctly, they each represent a imbalance in the Yochid Tzibur combination. In other words, what happens is the Dor of Noach, I would argue, and we could talk about it later if you want, is the Dor that speaks of individuality to an extent that destroys community. And in the case of the Dor HaFlaga, the generation of dispersion, the opposite is true. The rabbis say that if a brick fell off the tower, they would go into mourning. But if an individual fell off the tower, they wouldn't pay attention. All that mattered was the society. So it is after the destruction of those two societies that HaKadosh Baruch Hu then says, now we're going to start again. And we're going to take a particular people, and part of that people's legacy will be the balance between Yachid and Tzibur. Part of the people's balance will be the balance between the individual and the community. And if you think about it, we jockey all the time between these two. Think of the way we daven, for example. So it's best to daven in a crowd, right? It's best to daven in a minyan. However, what's the most important tefillah that we recite? Shema the Shmona Esrei. I would argue as a tefillah, the Shmona Esrei or the Amidah. How is that recited? Quietly, individually. I'm not part of it, right? At that point, I tune everyone else out, and it's just me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But is the Amidah written in the singular or the plural? Plural. So primarily plural. In other words, all of the brachot are there in the plural, so that brings the tzibur into my individual communion with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then once after I recite the Amidah, what happens? Then the Chazan recites it for everybody. So that's just one example of how we jockey between the importance of the individual and the importance of the community. And the balance has to be a healthy one. And by the way, that balance defines every society over time. For example, I was had the opportunity years ago to go to the Soviet Union, which was not a great opportunity, but the opportunity was to meet with refuseniks. And it was an astounding experience. For example, you went in the trains underneath, clean as a whistle, no graffiti, right? Why? Go to Siberia if you do graffiti, right? So what basically was happening in that society was there was a disregard of the individual and a worship of the community, worship of the society. And that's why the society eventually destroyed itself, because if you're not reinforcing individuals and giving them rewards for their hard work, you're just saying, you're doing this for Mother Russia and it's all okay, then the society can't exist. And that's why, by the way, the Yachid and Tzibur balance is why the generation of the flood is destroyed completely, because God has to destroy, unfortunately, the individuals. In the case of the Dor HaFlaga, what does God destroy? The society, right? He does not destroy the individuals. He destroys the society by confounding their languages, and they are split apart. So that's first. That's the first contribution made by the Dor of the Avos and Imahos. The second is the following. We as a people are born nationally with a pre-existing history, with a legacy. And that is extremely important for us. Knowing that we're going to the land that God promised us is one thing, but knowing that we're going to the land that God promised to our forefathers or to our grandparents, it's like a beautiful pearl. If you have a beautiful pearl and you wear it, but then you find out that it was your grandmother's to start with, then that raises its value tremendously. So what's happening is, if you follow the Parshiot in Shmot, when God talks to Moshe, and talks to the people, over and over again, he says, I'm the God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You're going to the land of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So what we have is a pre-existing legacy, a pre-existing history before we become a nation. And that enriches our national experience. And finally, the last important contribution that is made, and we're going to focus on this, is the importance of the family. In addition to being an era of individuality, it's an era in which families are the totality of Jewish experience, and the home. And the journey is a journey on one level from Abraham's Lech Lecha, go, separate yourself from everything around you, to the final scene, which we will talk about soon, which is the scene of Yaakov on his deathbed. And what has been accomplished over the course of those years is that by the time you get to Yaakov on his deathbed, all of his children are in the stream. All of his children, putting aside some difficult moments in their development, but right now, by the time you get to Yaakov's deathbed, he is able to say all of these children, and we'll see it. It actually gives rise to a tefillah that we say. All right, so therefore, the family, and this is something that as a rabbi, as a pulpit rabbi, I told my community over and over again. The school is important, the synagogue is important, but the family plays the greatest role in defining and shaping individuals. When someone would come to me and say, Rabbi, the school should teach my child not to cheat. Am I wrong? You should teach your child not to cheat. You have to shoot. So much. That's what was wrong with so much of the Jewish after-school schools in the conservative movement. And I taught there, where parents would come and say, this is for them to learn in school. We're not doing it necessarily, right? I remember one particular mother coming to me and saying, my daughter is going to miss class for a while because she's in a baton twirling championship. And it's very important for her as a Jew to participate in this baton twirling championship. And if she wins, my God. So therefore, what the legacy of the era of the Avos and Imos is also the legacy of family, the importance of the family, the importance of the home. And it takes 3 generations in the early Jewish history to arrive at the point where the family is fulfilled, where the family is whole. And there's a message in that as well. I think one of the ways of understanding it is that when Avram is told, Lech lecha, go from your land, he's also being told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you and your home will now have to raise your children, not the tribe, not the society. Because in those days, and in other societies, the tribe raised the children. The home. And remember, and I'll say this is the last comment I'll say on this, is that when the nation is born through Yetziat Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to them, the night before you leave, you have to do something. And what do you have to do? You have to do the Korban Pesach. And what was the Korban Pesach? A family meal, right? In other words, you have this stress. We're not outside doing constitutional conventions. We're not doing declarations of independence. We're not even having committee meetings, thank God, or we still be in Egypt. But the point is that, I'll tell you a story about that later. So the point being that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is underscoring, before, on the eve of you becoming a nation, go home, sit with the family, strengthen that bond. And that's the third contribution that I think comes to us from the era of the Avos and Imahos in a very real way. Now, I'm sure there are other answers, but these are the 3 that have been meaningful for me. Now, we're going to now journey to that moment, to the moments, if you will, of the transition from the era of the Avos and Imahos to the national era. And we're closing out the era of the Avos and Imahos. So the first issue is reunion and reconciliation. Right? This is a family that's been torn apart by strife and difficulty. We can't forget or put aside the fact that the brothers put him in the pit, and even if they weren't the ones, and this is a whole other discussion, to actually sell him, they set the stage for, they said they are culpable. When Yosef reveals himself, therefore, what's their reaction? So take a look. On the first page, for at this moment, Yosef cannot hold back. He's been hiding his identity from his brothers. He can't hold back. And we dealt with this last week. Vayishmu Mitzrayim, Vayishma Beis Paro. Why Paro's household is happy about it is another discussion. Vayomer Yosef Elechov, Geshuno Elai Vayigashu. Vayomer Ani Yosef Achichem, Asher Mechartem Osi Mitzraymo, Viato Al Teatzvu Vial Yichar Beinechem, Ki Mechartem Osi, Ki Lemechyosh Lachani Elokim Lifnechem. What does Yosef do? Well, we spoke about this when we spoke about Yosef individually. He constantly brings God into the picture, right? That's one thing here. But he's he's working very hard now to allay the fears of the brothers, because the brothers have every reason to expect that now he's powerful, now he's whatever he is, what's he going to do to us? So he pulls them in and he tries to put them at ease. The second reunion is on page 2. The second reunion, just very shortly, is Vayesar Yosef Merkavto. Yosef, he hears that Yaakov has come to Egypt. In other words, he's brought the family down. Yosef has brought the family down, and Yaakov is there. He gets into his chariot. Vaya lekras Yisrael aviv. He goes to see his father Yisrael. Why is he called Yisrael at this point? We'll talk about that in a little while. Vayipol al tzavarov, vayevch. They each fell on each other's neck. Can you imagine? Just imagine when we read these stories that are so familiar to us. Put ourselves in this position. Now, there are two aspects. Number one is Yaakov is just not just can't get over the simcha of seeing his son that he thought was dead. Can't get over it, right? On the other hand, does Yaakov ever hear what happened? We don't know. There's so much that's left out of the Torah. All right? In other words, Yaakov, here's Yosef. He suddenly appears. I thought he was dead. What the heck happened? Right? Where did the brothers tell him? Does Yosef tell him? It is not found in the text. And that's one of the unanswered questions that continues to plague us as we think about the story. But that's the reunion. Now let's take a look at the second paragraph on page 2, and let's see if the reconciliation that we spoke about between the brothers and Yosef took hold. Vayiru ache Yosef ki meis avihem. Yaakov dies. And what do the brothers say? Lu yistamenu Yosef, maybe Yosef will hate us. Now that our father is gone, he may feel that he can operate with he wouldn't move against us during the time that Yaakov was alive, my father was alive, because I wouldn't do that to Yosef wouldn't do that to his father. But now that he's dead, they have absolutely no barrier between Yosef's anger and them. What do? Vayitzavu el Yosef lemor, they turn to Yosef saying, Avicha tziva lifnei Moshe, your father commanded before his death, kisomru, that we should speak to you and ask you to forgive us for all the things we've done. Now, did Yaakov ever say that? Maybe he did. Again, all right? The Torah only tells us what HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks we need to know, right? But these are interesting questions. There is one point of view that says Yaakov said it, and they're just repeating it, even though we don't know. The other is they're making it up, right? And the rabbis say they use this as one of two instances where you can lie for the purpose of peace. All right? One is when Sarah is told that she's going to have a child, right? And she turns and says, how will I have a child? I'm old and my husband is aged, right? And when the Malachim speak, they leave out that second part, right? Sarah was was questioning because she's old. They didn't say Avram is old. Why? Because she didn't want to cause strife between Avram and Sarah. And this is the second place that, according to Chazal, perhaps they made up a fictional conversation for the purpose of peace, for the purpose of getting along. And but what we see here is that the reconciliation between Yosef and his brothers is tenuous. It's not strong.
Did he ever really forgive them? It doesn't look like it. It doesn't ever say salachti.
He does. He says, he doesn't say salachti. He says, don't be upset because what you did worked out well. Right? That's really what he's saying. You're right. You don't see any actual statement of I'm forgiving you for it. I'm not sure you could. Right.
Some say that.
Well, that's right. That's the payback.
Because Yosef did not forgive.
Could be. All right. Yes.
Would it be a hint, sort of, that Yaakov did know if they say that he said, are they indicating that Yaakov knew?
Oh, that's a good point. In other words, in this conversation with Yosef, what are they saying? That Yaakov made us swear that you should forgive us. That means they were aware, that Yaakov was aware. Unless the brothers are making the whole thing up, right? And saying he knew and whatever. Yes?
I think that you said before that I think that Yosef, by saying what he said to his brothers, he was saying, I accept Hashem's will. You were meant to do what you did so that I could be here. That was Hashem's will. So don't worry.
Right.
This is Hashem's will, and I think that they wrote this thing in Yaakov's name to allay their own fears.
Right. And to hope that Yosef will treat them well, which he does. Which he does. They were scared. Right. So as we're saying, the reconciliation between Yosef and the brothers is tenuous. Last comment, and then we'll go on.
Two items. Going back to the beginning, do we have any indication that the brothers sold Yosef to the Egyptians?
No. That's a whole issue. Right. The fact is, the Torah is very unclear at the moment of Yosef's sale. Because what happens is you have the Ishmaelim coming, then you have the Midyanim who suddenly show up at Times Square in the desert here. And the Torah says they reached down and pulled him out. Pashat Pshat, Rashbam, Pashat Pshat is that the Midyanim pulled him out and sold him to the Ishmaelim. Right? So it's not clear.
And secondly,
but just one comment. But he does say, he says to them, don't feel bad that you sold me.
that's the second question. If he wants to come forward to them
Right,
and have shalom bayis,
right.
all he had to say to Yosef, what other Yosef did I know? Why Asher mechartem oti?
Because he's saying, I'm not ignoring our past. I'm not ignoring it, and it would be.
Is that to his credit?
I think so. I think he's being honest. I think, look, on a human level, right? On a human level, could we expect him to really ignore what happened? Right? So it's better to say you did it, or you were responsible, even if you didn't actually sell me, you're responsible, you threw me in the pit, you started the whole process. And that's that. So therefore I think that he doesn't, the comment is well taken. He never says, I forgive you, to my knowledge in the Torah. I'd have to check again. But he does allay their fears. He does say, this was God's plan. It's worked out beautifully. If I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be able to have food. So all is good. All right. Well, last comment.
But if he believed in the interpretation of his dream, then that's the way he would think. That he, in my mind, it was a forgiving of the because it was the whole plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anybody of us who learns about forgiveness should always remember that Hashem's plan was it.
Right.
And not blame the person. But in my mind, he did forgive them.
Okay, could be. Again, I leave the question open for you to think about and discuss. All right, now we're moving on. In page number 3, one step further. Now, what is this about? Yaakov is in Egypt now. Yosef is the viceroy. Yosef hears word that his father is ill. All right, his father's taken ill. And Yaakov and Yosef travels to Yaakov's bedside. And who does he bring along? Menashe and Ephraim, right? And we see here, I think the Rav Soloveitchik points out, this is the first time we see a patriarch or matriarch dealing with their grandchildren, right? This is the first encounter. But it's a very complex encounter. Let's take a look. He starts off by saying to Yosef, God appeared to me in Luz, which is Beit El, where he had his dream. He promised me he would make us into a great nation. Va'ato shnei vanecha hanoladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim ad boi elecha Mitzrayim. And now the 2 sons that were born to you in Egypt before I arrived, lihim, they belong to me. Let's see what that means. Ephraim and Menashe Kireuven v'Shimon yihu li. They will be like Reuven and Shimon. Now, in what way are they like Reuven and Shimon? They become tribes. In other words, what happens is Yaakov is weaving into the tribe, to the structure of Bnei Israel, intergenerational connection. And therefore, you've got the sons turned into tribes, Benjamin, Asher, etc., and you have Ephraim and Manasseh. So, all right. So, very, very good point. I was going to raise it, so let's comment for a moment. I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. She asked about the double portion that is given to the firstborn. Actually, the truth is that Reuven, who was the firstborn, should have received three things. He should have received Malchus. He should have received the ritual work of in the base Mikdash, and he should have gotten two portions of whatever. Right. He loses because of his own inadequacies, and that's another discussion. He loses because he's pachas kamayim, because according to his father, he's unstable as water. He rushes in. He does things and doesn't think about them, basically. That's Reuven. And what happens is all of those gifts are given to different sons. Yehuda becomes Malchus. Levi becomes the ritual observance, the avoda. And Yosef gets the two portions of a firstborn. Now, all right, so what's happening is, and that's what she pointed out. Thank you. So therefore, what you see happening is this is a subtext beneath this whole story, which is who rises to leadership and why. Yes?
Why Shimon?
Shimon is not.
It says Keruven v'Shimon.
Oh, Keruven v'Shimon.
Why Shimon?
My answer would be because they're the first. He's saying they're like all my sons, and it's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, etc. So that's what he's saying. They're equal to all the others. One other thing, though, that always struck me is that as beautiful a gift as it is that Yosef has his two sons woven into the structure of the tribes, his name is not there. His name is not there. There is no tribe of Yosef. And that underscores something we mentioned before, but Yosef is we'll see it again in a moment. It's it's sad story. He has never won, he's tremendously successful. The Torah says he's an ish matzliach. It doesn't say that about anybody else. He's a successful guy wherever you put him, right? The great American success story. Wherever you put him, he rises to the top. But he's always on the outside. He's never won with whatever community surrounds him. He's alone among the brothers. He's alone among the Egyptians as well. And we spoke about that when we spoke about why he couldn't contact his father.
Doesn't that sound a little bit like Jews in general?
She said, doesn't it sound like Jews? All right. All right. Well, it's a symbol of galut. It could be. Right? Very good. Very good. Correct. But on a personal level, it's a sad statement. In other words, it's he wants to be one with the brothers. He wants to that reconciliation to be full, and it never happens. Let me ask you save the questions. I'll give us time at the end. All right. So what happens now? So Yaakov turns, and so this pasuk is very important, and you can read it, and not recognize when Yaakov says, "Lihem," what he is doing. They belong to me. What he is doing on a technical level is he is placing them among the tribes. He's raising them to that position. Those that are born to you after them, they're yours. They're not these. Just these two will become tribes, and the rest will be part of the family. And he then says, speaks about Rachel's death. Not clear why he brings that in now, but I'm not going to discuss that now. Vayar Yisrael es bnei Yosef, vayomer miele. Who's that? Now, stop right there, right? Here is Yaakov saying, I never expected to see you, Yosef, and now I've seen your children, right? And saying they're going to be tribes. I'm raising them to a very important stature. Behave. He doesn't recognize them. Now, and this is a point that you could argue with me on, but I think I'm right. Yosef says, Banaihem asher nosan li Elokim bazeh. They are my children, my sons, that God has given to me in this, and I'll come back to that. Vayomer Yosef Banaihem asher nosan li Elokim bazeh. And Yaakov again says, Re'ei fanecha lo pilalti. I never expected to see you again, and God has allowed me to see your children. But the intermediate sentence before the Re'ei panecha is Ve'nei Yisrael kavdu mizoken lo yuchal leros. His eyes are heavy because of his old age, and he can't see well. So we might be tempted to say when he says lihaim that it's because of the blindness. I mean, that would seem to be a reasonable statement. But the Torah does not speak of the blindness before he says mi'ela, right? In other words, he says mi'ela, and Yosef answers, and then the Torah says his eyes are dimmed, and he calls them closer. So there's another reason that he doesn't recognize them. What's the other reason? Right, they're Egyptians. That the fact is, they're Egyptians. In other words, they are part of the culture that surrounds them. The way we're dressing, the things we do, changes by the culture, etc., and sometimes is woven into the fabric of our tradition, and sometimes we have to say no, that can't be part of the Masorah. But that's that part. Hold on, all right, at the end, all right.
No, it's not a question.
What?
It's not who are, I say this, who have they become? Not who are they, but who have they become? Are they Egyptians, or are they have the value?
Well, you're reading into his question that the balance that we're talking about. That's very nice, but that's not what he says. I think that's what the Torah is teaching us. The Torah is teaching us that we change based upon our surroundings, and that's why Yosef says, by the way, Asher nosan li Elokim bazeh. That these are the children that God gave to me here, right? So I've had to deal with that. So what you see is the movement of tradition to the next generation. In other words, it's intergenerational now. It's not just parents to children. Now Yaakov is relating to his grandchildren, raising their stature, but you also see the tension of growing up in an alien society, and that tension is going to appear even stronger in a few moments. Right. Well, one of the things we've said is that the definition of Masorah, all right, I don't mind repeating this because I think it's important. The definition of Masorah is often misread. All right, if you talk to people will say, "What's Masorah?" You receive from one generation and you hand it down to the next. What's missing? Right. You receive the tradition; it courses through you, your time, your family, etc., and then is handed down. And it changes. It shapes. Obviously, there are things we would argue that don't change, but cholent isn't in the Torah, right? Gefilte fish isn't in the Torah. I mean, the things that we say, Ashkenazic Sephardic isn't in the Torah, all right, to really be clear. So much of what we consider to be Jewish experience and history are contributions of previous generations. And we are doing the same thing. So we should be careful what we're contributing. All right, that's what it comes down to, and that's the challenge of each generation, is to create the box that I told you that there is a debate concerning how we traveled in the desert. Right, the Torah describes our encampment when we're settled, but doesn't say what it looked like when it was moving. And the two rabbis argue, of course. One of them says, Kikora, they traveled like a single file, right? In other words, they broke up camp and traveled in a singular line. And his proof text is, Dan is the mi'asef l'chol hamachanot, that the tribe of Dan brings up the rear. You can only bring up the rear if there's a rear to bring up. So that's why they traveled that way. According to the second position, they traveled keteva. No, they were in a box, right? And they traveled in a box. They just stood up and walked as a teva. See, not an ark, a box, as a box. All right, everybody got that? And the suggestion I would make is, because you can ask, why doesn't the Torah tell us how they traveled? It tells us why they settled, that we travel on both dimensions as ones. On one hand, we travel as a Korah because we're going somewhere. We're traveling somewhere. We're on that, according to Rav Soloveitchik, that is the contribution that Judaism made to the concept of history, that we believe history is destiny-driven and not driven by causality. In other words, that we're moving somewhere. It's not just the product of what came before. It's being pulled. The second point, though, is that as we travel Kikora in each generation, we create our own teva. Each generation creates its box. And that's what we're talking about now. And that is that what this generation looks like, what it in different countries, different ways, et cetera, et cetera. And then we hand down that box to the next generation as well. And they have to make their own box. And who's in, who's out, who do we accept, who don't we accept? It's all very, very, at the borders of the box, it's very, very active, right, and very unclear.
Where did Chazal get the idea that the way they traveled in the Midbar was the way they carried the Aron of Yaakov when they buried him in
The
Canaan?
Goldin,
I never heard that. I don't remember that.
beginning of Midbar, it says that they knew already, that they all accepted where they had to be because.
Was they were in that place?
The way they carried
Yeah.
him.
All right.
they-
It's a medrash. I think it's not in the text. Okay, next. Now and the second comment, just quickly on page 4, is, first of all, Yaakov blesses them. He puts Menashe, Ephraim Menashe, and he puts Ephraim before Menashe, which is a whole other discussion. But why do we bless our kids to be like Ephraim and Menashe? I mean, when we bless the girls, it's Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Why don't we say Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? That's one answer. That's survive in Golus, that they are able to maintain their traditions in an alien society. And they represent this continuing saga of being able to do that. The second point is, this is the first time we see two brothers really getting along, right? And they're not just getting along, but Menashe is willing to accept that even though he should be the first, now that takes a real person, right? That takes real guts. So therefore, what you have is we are blessing them that our children should be harmonious and that they should be successful in an alien society. All right. Then the next thing that I put down is the quote in the Torah, Vayar Yosef leEphraim, B'nei Shileshim, Gam B'nei Machir ben Menashe, Yoldu al Birkei Yosef. As sad as it is that Yosef is alone, he has the opportunity to see the birth of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And the Torah, why is the Torah telling us that? Again, I think because it's stressing, as we leave this period of the family, how important and beautiful the family is, and how much it meant to Yosef. All right, now, the next section, it says the coda to the matriarchal era. All right, so this is the scene at Yaakov's deathbed. This is the point where all of his children are surrounding him. And there is a very beautiful medrash that underscores something that I said earlier. and that is that this is the moment where everybody's in the process, everybody's in the river. I say there's a river, and when people ask me how I feel about my children, who are all different in the way they look at the world, I say there's a river, and there are lots of currents in the river. As long as you're in the river, we're okay. So all of Yaakov's children are in the river, right? All of them are part of the sweep of history. But the Gemara takes it a step further. When you say the Shema, there's a pasuk you say that's not part of the Shema. It's inserted, right? And that's why we say it in low tones. What is that? Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuso Le'olam V'ed. Where did that come from? So according to Chazal, one possibility is the following: that that's what this paragraph is saying. As Yaakov looks at all of his children, he becomes fearful, becomes afraid. He says, how do I know that all of my children will be in the river? How do I know that they're all going to be part of our Masorah? After all, my grandfather had Yishmael, right? My father had Esav. How do I know that these children of mine are all going to be within? The children, not children, but the grown children, right, sense their father's fear. And what do they say? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That this pasuk is actually born before we see it appears in the Torah. It appears later in the Torah. And what is Yisrael at that point in this statement? Yaakov. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. When Yaakov hears that, he lies back down on the bed and he says, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Le'olam V'ed. Now I know that God's honored presence, etc., will exist across the years forever. Because if all of them are in with me, then I can relax. I can accept that. All right, turn to the next page. There's an interesting end to the meeting between the brothers and Yaakov, in that he blesses each one. He blesses the tribes, right, and prophetically. But after that, the Torah says, "Kol ele shivtei Yisrael shem asar." All of these descendants of Yaakov end up being tribes, 12. V'zos asher diber lohem avihem, and this is what their father said to them. We told you that. Vayevorech osam, ish asher kavir koso beirach osam. It's a very strange structure. Each one, according to his blessing, did he bless them. Right? Why does it come in plural? Should be, did he bless him? So the rabbis say, Chazal say, that what's really happening is that at this point, Yaakov, after giving them individual brachot, includes them all in each other's brachot. But there's a problem with that. If that's what he wanted to do, and that was the end game, why didn't he do that from the start? Why doesn't he say, here are a whole series of brachot that you all can have, and the brachot that he does give are dependent and shaped by the experience of the people. And in other words, Yehuda goes to Malchus because he did tshuva, because he did the right thing, because he stood up with courage to save Binyamin. So what do you mean you included them in all the brachot? So a suggestion I would make is the following, that maybe what they're really saying is that after giving them their individual brachot, he gives them one overarching bracha, that they should learn to share. That each one of them should share of his blessing with his brothers. And it's not only a blessing, but it's also a tzivui. It's also a commandment. It's also a direction. All right. I don't think we're going to have the time to do everything, but we're close. Take a look at the next section. And clouds on the horizon. All right. And what we're saying at this point is, what we've looked at is what's happening in the tribes with in the family. And how did they reconcile? Didn't they reconcile? What were the brachot, et cetera, et cetera. But as this is happening on a human level, what's also unfolding is the national story, the story, right? And this is a paragraph, the bottom of page 5, which is a paragraph that we read often, but we don't see how brilliant the Torah is in what it tries to convey. We're now talking about the moment, we're going back to the moment that the brothers come back and tell Yaakov that Yosef is alive, right? And take a look at how the Torah describes that. And what's key is that Yaakov's name shifts back and forth between Yisrael and Yaakov. And in this case, you can really see why. Take a look. Vayalu Mitzrayim v'yavo'u eretz Canaan el Yaakov avihem. Right? They come from Mitzrayim, they come to Canaan, to Yaakov, their father. Vayagidu lo leimor, they say to him, you're not going to believe it. Yosef is alive. Right? And his reaction is, what? I don't believe you. Right? What are you telling me this for and torturing me for? It's not true. Right? Vayagidu lo leimor Yosef vayofeg libo v'lo ha'amin lohem. Vayidabru elav is called divrei Yosef. And they said, this is what Yosef said, and this is, we're telling you, he's alive. Vayar es ha'agolot, vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem. The next underlined section. He sees the carts or the chariots, whatever they are, that Yosef has allowed them to take to bring the family up, and he says, "Well, now I believe it. I'm beginning to believe." Now there is a medrash here and a pashut pshat. The medrash is that Yosef and Yaakov had a secret sign that identified them to each other. And what was that? That they were learning the passage of Eglah Arufa, which is a passage dealing with the responsibility of people to people, right? And what's happened is somebody is found dead between two towns, and the towns have to accept responsibility for that, right? So it's a very beautiful medrash. What's the pshat? He sees the agolos, and the only way those things could be here is if Yosef was in charge and sent them. Paro would have never sent that. So on a pashut pshat level, vayaris agolos vatchi ruach. All right, look at the next sentence. Vayomer Yisrael Rav od Yosef chai. So suddenly he's no longer Yaakov, right? He's transformed into Yisrael, because he is now going to see his beloved son that he has thought dead for so many years, etc., etc. Vayisa Yisrael, and Yisrael traveled. He's skipping down the path. He's really can't wait. Vayomer Elokim liYisrael b'marot halayla. God appears to him on this journey in a night vision, right? Which is very cloudy. It's very dark, very dark. And what does God say? Vayomer Elokim liYisrael b'marot halayla, Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov. Right? So Yaakov. Right? Well, correct. Vayomer hineni, and he answers, here I am. Vayomer, Anochi akel Elokei avicha, al tira merdor Mitzrayim, ki legoy gadol asim chasham. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, because I will make you into a great nation there, right? And you will have a reunion. Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayim of Anochi ela gamola. I will bring you down to Mitzrayim and accompany you, and I will accompany you out. And where's Yosef Yoshis Yado Aleinecha? Yosef will put his hands on your eyes, which means you're going to die in Egypt. So what's happening here? God turns to Yaakov, who is Israel, and says to him, don't be afraid. But he's not afraid. He's not acting like someone who's fearful. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him is, Yaakov, Yaakov, you should be afraid. Right? Because what's happening now is not just a reunion between father and son, but the onset of a very difficult period for your progeny. So you should know that this is unfolding, and there's a piece of you that should be hesitant here. You shouldn't be so excited. Then after saying you should be afraid, what does God say? Don't be afraid, because I'll take care of you. Right. So he's telling him the whole picture, but he's doing it in a way that it is saying to him, recognize the reality of the moment. What happens? Look at the very next statements. The bottom, right? Vayokom Yaakov mi Beersheva, vayisu b'nei Yisrael es Yaakov avihem. Yaakov gets up from Beersheva, where he's had this encounter apparently with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, but he's not Yisrael, right? God has punctured the balloon, all right? In other words, this is not as simple as he thought. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael es Yaakov avihem. He's not even going. They have to carry him now, right? So in other words, what has happened is, and this is what's very key here, is particularly in the patriarchal and matriarchal era, but in other places too, the Torah unfolds on multiple levels, right? On one level, it's the story of a family. On one level, it's the story of a nation. And as these multiple levels unfold, they coalesce, and one informs the other. So what's happening here is Hashem is saying to Yaakov, this is a much more important moment and a much more complex moment than you recognize. Yes, it's true. You're going to see Yosef and you'll have that reunion, but be aware of what it means to you and your children, and be aware that you're embarking on this path. Okay. The next section, which I'm not going to have time to do now, and perhaps we'll do when I come back, is Yosef's plan for his brothers, what he wants them to say to Paro, and what Paro responds, etc., etc. Basically, I'll just put it out there. Yosef, who is the cosmopolitan Jew, who succeeds, the symbol of success in an alien society, orchestrates the first ghetto, right? By basically saying, tell Paro that you guys are shepherds. He'll hate that. He'll let you live separately. So here's the cosmopolitan, the guy who was successful in the alien world, turning to them and saying, you got to create your distance. Do they or don't they? We'll talk about that when I get back. Yes. I'm sorry.